Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It is Shamira here. This time we are going to be doing CPC practice exam questions on ICD-10. So we are not going to be in the CPT manual for this video, strictly ICD-10 only. And I wanted to let you guys know you're only going to have 10 questions related to ICD-10, but you're also going to have 6 questions related to ICD-10 and CPT guidelines. So you want to make sure that you are reading the guidelines in both books, not just CPT. Also paying attention to the indicators, so excludes 1 or excludes 2. When your books say code first or code additional, pay attention to those indicators because you don't want to be missing diagnosis codes or adding diagnosis codes that you don't need. Let's just jump right into the video. Make sure you hit that like button and let's begin. If you can hear my cricket friends in the background of this video, I'm so sorry. I'm recording this video in the morning, so I can't help it, and they're just going to be going on probably throughout this entire video. For our first question, we have, when is the placeholder X used in the ICD-10-CM? A, it is used to indicate a subdivision of a code with 8 characters. B, it is used to stipulate that no further expansion is needed for certain codes. C, it is used to stipulate that further expansion is needed for certain codes. Or D, it is used to define a particular code and indicates that no further expansion is needed. So in order to figure out this answer, you are going to have to look in your coding guidelines. So let's head over there. Looking in your ICD-10 guidelines, you want to go to number 2 where it says format and structure, and they tell us that codes may be 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 characters. So letter A we can eliminate because we do not have 8 character codes. And then down at number 4, it says the X is used as a placeholder at certain codes to allow for further expansion. So B and D we can eliminate because they were talking about no further expansion is needed. And that leaves us with C. It is used to stipulate that further expansion is needed for certain codes. I personally like guideline questions because the answers are right there in your book. So again, this is what I had said for that X placeholder. My next question, we have a 40-year-old male has staphylococcal septicemia with systemic inflammatory response syndrome and acute respiratory and hepatic failure. So in your guidelines, you want to go to the chapter-specific guidelines. And once you get there, you want to go over to where it says coding of sepsis and severe sepsis. And it states, for a diagnosis of sepsis, assign the appropriate code for the underlying systemic infection. If the type of infection or causal organism is not further specified, assign a code A41.9, sepsis unspecified organism. But they told us that it was a staphylococcal infection. So we are not going to be using an unspecified code because we have the organism. Right underneath it says a code from subcategory R65.2, severe sepsis, should not be assigned unless severe sepsis or an associated acute organ dysfunction is documented. And we have the acute organ dysfunction, which is the respiratory failure and the hepatic failure. So we are going to be looking at A41 point, and we need to figure out point what, and then R65.2 because we have the acute organ dysfunction. So let's now look in our index and see if we can figure out these codes before we look in the tabular list. If you were to go to septicemia, it would tell you meaning sepsis, C sepsis. So you'll just go up here to where it says sepsis, and now you need to find the infection, the organism, bacteria, whatever type of sepsis they have, and staphylococcal right here tells us A41.2. So now we need to look for severe, and severe is just right above, and it says R65.20. So we're going to write down both of those codes, and then we are going to confirm them in the tabular list. In our tabular list at A41, other sepsis, over here A40 was streptococcal sepsis, but it was not strep. So that is why we are at the other sepsis. And what I like about my ICD-10 book is my book has the guidelines also within the tabular list. So I don't have to flip back and forth to the guidelines every single time I'm looking at a code and I'm not sure. And my book is by Decision Health. I can leave a link to it for you guys in the description box. But remember what we just read about the sepsis? That information is actually right here. I think it's a time saver having the guidelines right here, and not all ICD-10 books have it. But back to our question, we are going to be looking at that A41.2 like it told us. And it says sepsis due to unspecified staphylococcus. And right above that was other specified staph. And we did not have the staph specified, or when you see other, that means that the documentation has a diagnosis that the ICD-10 does not have a code for. So we're not going to use other because they did not tell us the type of staph infection that it was. So we are going to be looking at A41.2. And here is another guideline that tells us the coding of severe sepsis requires a minimum of 2 codes. First, a code for the underlying systemic infection, and then you want to code the R65.2 whenever there is also an organ dysfunction or organ failure. So now we need to go over to R65.2. And here we are at severe sepsis, and it says infection with associated acute organ dysfunction that the patient has, sepsis with acute organ dysfunction, patient has that as well, and sepsis with multiple organ dysfunctions. We do have multiple. We had respiratory and liver. And then it also says systemic inflammatory response syndrome due to infectious process with acute organ dysfunction. That is everything that this question has. So R65.2 is definitely a code that we want to report, but how do we want to report them? And it tells us you want to code first the sepsis. Right here it says not otherwise specified, but we do have a specified code. It was the staph infection for sepsis. So instead of using the A41.9, we are going to code first, because it tells us code first. We're going to code first A41.2. And then down below it says use additional code to identify specific acute organ dysfunction. So whatever organ failure the patient has, you want to code those in addition to the A41 code and the R65.2 code. So we're going to be going over to the acute respiratory failure, and it tells us J96.0. And then look, hepatic failure, K72.0. And right here, I want to show you guys that there is a number 5 here. And down below, it'll tell you 4 to 7 digit indicators. So if you look at this code here, we only have 4 here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's a 5. So we are missing a digit. So you'll have to turn the page in order to code this to the highest level of specificity and to actually get the full code. And I get a whole lot more guidelines. But if I come down here, we will get to severe sepsis without septic shock. And then right here, it just says severe sepsis not otherwise specified. I also have coding tips in my book. It says when severe sepsis is present in a patient, sepsis with additional presence of an organ dysfunction, hypotension, or hypoperfusion, a code from R60.2 must be assigned in addition to the code identifying the underlying infection. An additional code is also should be assigned to identify all organ dysfunction present. So this tip right here just told me that I need to code the sepsis with the infection, which is our A41.2, use this second, and then an additional codes should also be assigned, which is going to be the ones that we just read about on the other page, which was J96.0, and then it was K72.0, and then there was dashes, because those dashes tell you that you're missing a digit. So let's go over to the J96.0. And here we are at respiratory failure, not elsewhere classified. And we get some excludes ones here. So that means you should not code any of these codes with J96. That is what excludes ones. Or there's another way of thinking of it. Excludes one means you only need one of the codes. If you see excludes two, which I don't see one. Oh, here's one over here. If you see an excludes two, that means possibly two codes can be used together. Excludes one means you only need one of them. Excludes two means you could have two codes. So moving back over here to J96, we have some guideline information here. Respiratory failure may be listed as secondary diagnosis if it occurs after admission. And then we come down here to our J96.00 acute respiratory failure, unspecified whether with hypoxia or hypercapnia. So J9600 looks like the code that we are going to need because the patient did have acute respiratory failure. Now we need to head over to the K and look for K72. In K72, we have hepatic failure, not elsewhere classified. And we see excludes ones. I don't see it telling us we can't use the J96 or any of our A or R codes. So I'm going to look here at acute and subacute hepatic failure. Here's that number 5 indicator, meaning this is you need to look further on. And right here, K72.00. Without coma. So our correct answer for this question is going to be D, A41.2, R65.20, J96.00, and K72.00. If you look at all the other answers that we have here, the first one, they had included the R6511, which was SIRS without an infection. That should told you that that is wrong for A and B. And then C, the codes are sequenced wrong, and the A40.8 was not the correct sepsis code. That should have told you that that was wrong. Our correct answer is D. And just to give a little bit more information on that 65.11 code, here at R65, it tells me, therefore, when a non-infectious condition leads to an infection resulting in severe sepsis, assign the appropriate code from subcategory R65.2. And remember I told you guys about the excludes one? Right here it says that for R65.1, they exclude 1 with R65.2. So you should not have R65.1 with an R65.2 code. The R65.1 codes are for non-infectious origins, and we have an infection. So that is why we did not code the R65.1 codes. Our next question says, how would you code coexisting conditions that the patient has but are not the primary reason for the encounter? Which answer is incorrect regarding coexisting conditions? So this is going to be a guideline question. So in our guidelines, you want to go to section 4, and that is going to be the diagnostic coding and reporting guidelines for outpatient services. You're going to turn the page. And looking at letter J, code all documented conditions that coexist. And it says code all documented conditions that coexist at the time of the encounter or visit and require or affect patient care, treatment, or management. Do not code conditions that were previously treated and no longer exist. However, history codes may be used as secondary codes if the historical condition or family history has an impact on current care or influences treatment. For letter A, it says all conditions in the patient's medical history should be coded. That right there should be a red flag as the incorrect answer, because let's say the patient is being seen for a urinary tract infection, but in her medical history, she had an ankle injury that she got at work. You would not code for the urinary tract infection plus ankle pain when the patient no longer has pain and it's not affecting treatment for this encounter. When you're trying to figure out what codes to choose from, do not code every single diagnosis that is in the patient's medical history, because that would be wrong. Could you imagine how long that diagnosis section would be on the claim when all the physician is doing is treating her urinary tract infection? So letter A is the correct wrong answer. And all our other answers are actually true facts. So B, all conditions that coexist at the time of the encounter should be coded if they affect or require a plan of care in the patient's treatment plan, the plan that the provider is doing at this encounter. C, conditions that previously existed and were treated that no longer exist should not be coded. And that's what I just got done telling you guys. And then D, history codes may be used as secondary codes for conditions that previously existed but have been treated and no longer exist. That is what we read in our guidelines, the very last part. For our next question, we have, how would you code acute bacterial endocarditis due to AIDS? And we see we have some B20s and we have an A80.39, and then our last codes are A33 or I33 or I39. So in our guidelines, we want to go to the very first section when they start talking about AIDS and HIV. And it tells us that asymptomatic human immunodeficiency virus infection status is to be applied when the patient, without any documentation of symptoms, is listed as being HIV positive, known HIV, HIV test positive, or similar terminology. Do not use this code if the term AIDS is used or if the patient is treated for any HIV-related illnesses or is described as having any conditions resulting from his or her HIV positive status. Use B20 in these cases. So we would be using Z21 if there was no symptoms and the provider had documented that the patient is HIV positive, or that it's known that the patient has HIV, or the HIV test was positive. But if the patient is currently having symptoms or the documentation states AIDS, we are using B20. So understand the differences between the two. So for this question, B20 is going to be the correct code. So we're looking at A, B, and C. We can eliminate D. And what you are going to do is go to endocarditis. And we see here that we have endocarditis. It tells us chronic, non-bacterial, but this is a bacterial endocarditis. So we're not going to be looking at I38. If we look here, we see acute and subacute is I33.9, and then infective is I33.0. Let's keep looking. We see acute again. We also see specified cause, and then here we have bacterial, acute, any valve, subacute, I33.0. So let's write that down. I33.0. And then we already told us that B20 was going to be listed. So looking at our answers, we can see that C is going to be the correct answer. And we didn't even get to the tabular list yet. But let's say the answers were listed like this. Look at B and C, I33.0 and B20, or C, B20 and I33.0. How would you know how to sequence these? Well, if you went into your guidelines, and my guidelines are actually listed right here at B20, and it says, if a patient is admitted for an HIV-related condition, the principal diagnosis should be B20, HIV disease, followed by additional diagnosis codes for all reported HIV-related conditions. So that right there tells you that B20 should be first and not the I33.0. Moving on to our next question, we have a 50-year-old female patient had 2 separate carbuncles removed from the left axilla. Pathology report indicated staphylococcal infection. In our index, we're going to look for a carbuncle, and you want to go to axilla, LO2.43 dash. Remember that dash means we need more digits. I'm going to write down that code LO243 dash. And then while we're still in the index, I'm just going to jump over to infection. And now we just want to look for a staph. And over here at staphylococcal unspecified site, we did not get MSSA or MRSA. So right here below it, it says as cause of disease classified elsewhere, B95.8. And if we keep looking, there's also specified but not elsewhere classified. And they did not tell us the type of staph infection. So we would not be looking at not elsewhere classified because they didn't tell us the specific staph infection that it was. So let's write down this B95.8. And we will confirm in our tabular list. Once you get over to the LO243, you will find carbuncle of limb, LO2.43, and then the 6th digit is what is going to give you the laterality. So down here at the bottom, you see these arrows going to the left and right. That means you need to be specific on if it's left or right, upper or lower, where is it located? And for ours, it is going to be the left axilla. So LO2.432 is going to be our code. And you see that we're not actually at the very beginning of LO2. So let's go there and see if they tell us to do anything specific. And they do. Right here at the beginning of LO2, you should always go to the beginning of where your code is and see if they're telling you to use any additional codes. Because on that previous page, it did not tell us to use additional. But here it says to use additional code to identify organism, B95 through B96. And there's an excludes note here, meaning you can use these codes if it applies to the patient. And I also have a coding tip, but we don't have any fruncles, so I don't have to worry about that. But the use additional, meaning the B95 is going to be an additional code listed. So that tells us that the LO2.432 should be first and the B95.8 should be second. Moving over to the B95 section, I have some guidelines here. And they're telling me a code from category B95 and B96 or other bacterial agents as the cause of the disease classified to other chapters, or B97, which is viral agents. These should be used as an additional code to identify the organism. So again, they're telling you to use these as additional codes. And here is our B95.8. So our correct answer for this question is going to be A. Another thing that I love about my book is the fact that they give definitions to medical terms. So you see furuncle, abscess, carbuncle, and I have a paper from the AAPC that they give you, I think, when you sit for your exam, and it tells you the references that you can bring. So for the CPC exam, the only books that you can bring are 1, 2, and 3. So that means you can bring a CPT book published by the AMA. It says no other publisher is allowed. And then 2, your ICD-10-CM. And it says that the printed ICD-10 official guidelines highlighting, underlining, and brief notations needed for day-to-day coding is permitted on the printed side of the page. Long passages of information are not permitted on the blank pages of the printout. So if there are any blank pages, like for instance, this page here that's on right in front of chapter 12, they do not want you to be writing full passages in here. Could you imagine what that would look like? I think that's funny. But depending on the instructor you have, they might not go through and look. Literally, what most of them do is they'll take your book, and all they'll do is they'll fan it like this and see if you have any loose pages, because you cannot have loose pages in your book. But for the most part, if you have like a little note here on this blank page, that is fine. What they don't want you to do is to have like an entire page like this filled with information, because that is not allowed. Over on the right side, you can see number 10 says one reference of your choice. This does allow medical dictionary. And number 10 is mainly for the specialty certification exams. It is not allowed for the CPC exam. You can only bring books 1, 2, and 3. So that's one of the reasons why I like my ICD-10 book, because they do have medical terms in here with the definitions for them. So, and I'm going to take you guys over to Decision Health's website so I can show you where you can get my exact ICD-10 book. From Google, you want to type in Decision Health, ICD-10-CM, and then for physicians. And then once you search for that, I think it's going to be the very first one that pops up as our option. Nope, down here. And then you'll see that here is my exact same book. And I did want to show you guys the option for the 2021 bundle where you can get your CPT, ICD-10, and HCPCS books all in one. But what might end up happening is we switched to 2022 ICD-10 on October 1st. So you might have to get your books separate in order to have the right books. I don't want you guys to buy the 2021 ICD-10 book and then take your exam after October, and then you're going to need to get the 2022 book. It's not going to be that much changes, but if you want the current book, then I would just wait until the 2022 books start for ICD-10. And then here is the option for 2022 books. And it says down below here that the CPT is not going to be available until September 22, and the HCPCS is not going to be available until December of 2021. And on the AAPC's website, here is their prices. So you would pay $259 if you're a non-member, and if you are a member of AAPC, then you would pay $229. And their ICD-10 book is different than mine, and I don't know if they're going to have the guidelines throughout the tabular list. So that's just something that you're going to have to decide if you want to get their ICD-10 book or the one that I have from Decision Health. And here is their 2021 bundle option as well. And all books are available for 2021. And for 2022, it says the CPT will be available September of this year. And then they will ship out the HCPCS book in December of this year. And this wraps up this video. I want to thank you all for watching. All the links will be down below. Make sure you hit that like button, and I'll see you in my next one.